everyone, and welcome. I'm Kirsten Nelson, content producer for AVIXA, and I'm really happy to welcome you to the first episode of the Tide Generator podcast. We're launching this podcast with several of the speakers that we had lined up for the Tide conference this year. The conversations we had planned were all about the built environment and experience design, and how to connect content with the space and the audience within it. That, of course, is a completely different conversation now, and we really wanted to ask our presenters to reframe these topics and bring them to you as soon as possible. We're working with some of the most innovative experience designers to take a look at what's next for us as we return to the built environment and reconvene as a society. So today, in the first episode, the topic is, what should we build next? We're going to be talking about the built environment and how a digital-physical hybrid sense of place will be accelerated in response to the new social distancing way of life. And we're going to look at a few new options for interactivity and connection as we return to the world around us. Which elements of virtual interactions will we see adopted in the spaces we build and rebuild now? Let's find out. All right, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of the brand new Tide Generator podcast. This is a podcast that we are launching with AVIXA in anticipation of the Tide conference that was planned for InfoComm 2020. Now that the show itself is going virtual and so much is changing, we're bringing some of the conversations from the Tide conference to this podcast format, and we're really excited to start talking about some of these subjects because so much of experience design is changing drastically right now as we speak. And I am very fortunate to have with me on my very first episode two of my favorite people to talk with on these topics. I have David Bianciardi. He is the founder and principal of AV&C here in New York City. And also I have Gideon D'Arcangelo, and he leads the experience design practice at Arup, also here in the New York City, the epicenter. So thank you so much for joining me, you guys. I feel really lucky because every time I talk with you, I'm getting a million ideas at once. So it's going to be fun to catch up with you and share with our audience some of the stuff you're thinking about as we drastically change everything we're working on in real time. So this first episode, we're going to focus on a session that was going to happen at Tide Conference and will still happen in some capacity. But the topic was called, what should we build next? And that was meant to be a discussion with the audience based on the factors of immersive experience design and how some of what we felt was missing from it and what opportunities we felt that there could be for what's possible in immersive experiences and experience design. So if ever there was a time to talk about what's possible, it's right now. I guess as we see experience design changing, as people are opting into different virtual experiences, seeking new ways to connect with each other with existing tools and sort of modifying a lot of the virtual stuff that's available to them, what aspects of those virtual connections do you think we might see come through in the built environment as we return to it in some new form?
I mean,
David, do you want to
Gideon,
jump
you
in?
and I have talked about this so much in different contexts in the last few weeks. I feel like we're likely to say similar things.
Right.
There's so many different aspects to it, which is how do we connect when we're not able to be together? How will we connect when we are able to be together again? And you can look at it across so many different aspects. I mean, I was just on a phone call earlier helping an event for a client think about what do we do when we don't want to bring 10,000 people together at the same time in the same place for our event in September. And it's just like, okay, it becomes, you use the temporal aspect. You say, okay, well, we need to design a high throughput, low density environment where 10,000 people can have the experience, but instead of having it together in an hour, we're going to spread it out over 10 hours. And so what does that mean in terms of the performers and the way that AI and generative techniques can sort of bubble out the environment for 10 hours at a time instead of a concentrated experience? So that's just like literally the latest little blip that has come across my radar on a conversation, Gideon, that you and I and Kirsten and others have been having for the past few weeks.
I've been thinking, we've been talking a lot about hybrid digital physical experiences, frankly, for most of our careers. And now it's really come to bear, and it's become really useful during this time. And I think that's interesting. People are being pushed to do the things that we maybe hypothesized that you might do, but there wasn't a compelling behavioral change required until now. And so, I remember, for example, we would do meetings before where half the people were in the conference room and half the people were online. And then there was this discussion about what was equal playing field for that. And like, maybe we should all be doing our, in that case, it was Skype for Business or Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever it is. And we should all be doing it so we're having the same equal experience. And we would always opt to, in the conference room, the people have the affordances of face-to-face interaction where you can, read someone's body language. You can just get a feel off them if they're what they're communicating non-verbally. And I would say now when we come back, there are certain advantages of doing these types of meetings and having everyone remote that you're going to see coming into the conference room. And I think everything will be hybrid moving forward.
Absolutely. And so you're saying not just the places that we design and create, but actually the process of inhabiting those places and also the way we design, right? Because I'm finding in my practice right now, we're pretty good at designing places that don't exist yet and bringing clients along. And I know this is true of your practice as well. And it's just like, how do we help clients understand not just what the architecture is going to be, not just what the technology is going to do and the behavior, the sort of the way the media is going to show up in a space, but actually what's the behavior in there? So we use, real-time game engines now to start to sort of explore those questions. And now I find what's interesting is some of the conversations we've been having internally about really using this period to double down on our tooling around how do we design in virtual places. And now it's not just places that don't exist yet that we need to bring our clients into, but it's actually, we need to visit places that do exist, but we can't go to with our clients. So I think the idea of multi-editor, multiplayer, virtualized environments for design are really going to, and you're going to see a lot of homebrew stuff like what we create for ourselves. You're also seeing now NVIDIA just came out with another bounce on, what is their environment called? It's their real-time photographic sort of shared design environment. So I'm curious how we work this way and how that will show up in the places we design while we're working this way. It's kind of, there's a meta aspect to it, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, we've been talking about what does it mean to bring a sense of place into these kinds of meetings, and I think that's going to push this hybrid design movement, if you will. And how can you bring the quality of like shaking someone's hand, making eye contact, again, those nonverbal things I talked about earlier back into these types of spaces? And then how can we bring some of the qualities of this type of interaction when we're actually able to, with social distance, convene in safe ways? And I'm reminded of Bill Verplank, one of the great interaction designers at Karma at Stanford. He had a class which was all about new interfaces. This is many years ago, and one of the students created this little haptic device that you wore around your neck, and the idea was that your best friend in the world or your spouse or your partner would wear this, and just when you wanted to say hey, you just like would squeeze that and it would like vibrate on the other person's pendant. And at the time, I remember, this was a long time ago, this was like 2003 or something like that, and I remember at the time I had to scratch my head and wonder if that was a necessary thing. And when I look back on it, my goodness, it's like that's all we do all day long by liking people's photos, and we're just like, yeah, I see you, man, I see you with my loved ones,
reaching out across the AV expanse.
And so I think haptics is one other way that we will be connecting with each other. That's it's research and development, but I think that, it's not something that there's a product here today, but that when you can just sort of respond to something that's happening here, almost like snapping, saying you like it, or doing something that has a haptic response in that environment, I think that'll bring some of that sense of place into this purely online play.
But also sharing some of our biometrics in permissioned ways would allow you to, and maybe it's not like you're not seeing somebody's, emergency room display. You're seeing something that suggests their mood or receptivity or interest levels or excitement. And, we've done projects in the real world that take those sensors and create reflections, sort of oftentimes abstract, but reflections of what people are doing or what their bodies are doing. So it's not a huge jump to go to what you're saying, which is actually, as we were talking about the other day, how do we create other channels other than this, crummy WebRTC stream and whatever, low latency codec is being used for audio.
Yeah, exactly.
How do we add those layers of context?
We were talking the other day, in our virtual cohort, the AVIXA, about different ideas for this, brainstorming this, and that was exactly one of the criticisms. All of the office communications tools are set up, optimized for what we're doing right now, and they're wonderful and amazing. But when you think of the next generation, is why are they so 2D? Why are they so kind of collagey and not spatial? And right after we did that brainstorming session, I went in and was watching my third grade daughter playing Roblox, with her friends, and they were just, occupying the gaming world is where this is happening already. And it was, they were like went down a virtual slide together and were just whooping and hollering, really whooping and hollering. Like there was enough of a leap of the experience that they could have that, and then it was like playing together safely. So why can't we get more of that? Yeah, why can't we? It doesn't take that much more to bring you there. Like I was looking over their shoulder and whooping and hollering myself, like we're going down a slide. It doesn't take that much. And so you talk about working in game engines in your shop, David. I think that bringing some of that spatial 3D interaction from games into this collaborative space is a definite next step towards making these more hybrid worlds.
Absolutely. And I think, just the fact that it doesn't take that much, we already know that because, people ask us all the time, you work in VR? It's just like, we work with VR all the time. We're not a shop that delivers VR projects, because we deliver experiences for people in places, right?
Right.
Sort of. So the question there is, when we say immersive in that context, we're always sort of having to describe what we mean by that. I know this is true for you as well.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we mean something very simple, like, just engaging the visual periphery can be enough to make you feel like you're in a different place, right? Yeah, from a visual standpoint. Yeah. We know how powerful sound design can be. We know how, right? And so all these contextual cues that we can give you, and it actually doesn't take that much. So when we think about how we go and re-inhabit spaces, and separate from like, okay, low density, high throughput, high touch environments, what does that look like? Well, a museum with a gated entry is already a pretty good model, right? But what happens when you go to a museum and you're not one of the people, for me, I go and I look and see what other people are doing with their faces in response to the artwork too. It's not just a solitary me and the object for me. Some people, so I'm just curious, it's going to take all kinds of things, but when we go back and re-inhabit these spaces, we're not going to go into the default, I don't think, of like, oh, yes, we've spent all this time in VR. Now we're going to go out in the world and share goggles. No, we know that we're not going to share goggles. We're probably not even going to share touch screens. Right. And so, or if we do, they're going to have some beautiful, silver ion coating or something that will, there's some growth industries there in the AV world for sure. But I don't know. It's what's gonna fill the gap. Voice, sure, but not in public spaces necessarily. Gesture. I think it's gonna be a lot more responsiveness, and we're going to rely less on interactivity, and bingo. Yeah.
And this
your
is,
own
you know,
device.
Your own
you brought
device.
Your own dirty thing.
It is quite dirty. And no, I think I've been thinking about that actually with some of my colleagues. We were talking about that, you know, even in conference rooms where, you know, the whole advantage was to create these little shared touch areas where everyone could do controls. And now that's a disadvantage. It's like an immediate disadvantage. So the fact that, you know, most people have this, you could imagine this becoming the public controller for so many things, and then still having some of those interactive experiences.
But what happens with some of the more tangible things? I mean, I'm thinking, you know, children's museums with all this very tactile, physical interaction. You can't wipe that down enough, right? And that audience is putting their hands in their face.
Yeah.
So what does that? How does that find some viable path, right? Is it that now that people are actually being handed maybe a tangible object or two, and they take it through the experience, but it's really the only thing they're touching, but it's sort of like the stand-in for all the knobs that you would turn, or the things that you would shake, or you know, you almost like you detach the interface and hand it to each visitor, each interactor, so that they can have their own. I don't know, you know, it's like there's so many questions that'll come up, and again, I think there's I think everybody to some degree is grieving right now, and we should be.
Yeah.
But, you know, we're designers. What are we going to do? We're going to see a problem. We're going to start designing against it. So it's kind of, there's an interesting, and not just reacting to the problem, but actually responding to what is the path forward look like in the medium and longer term. It's fun.
Yeah, I think that what you're describing sounds really great to me too, because you're describing the whole body experience in these spaces. We're sort of pulling us away from the screen-oriented nature of everything from meetings to going out into public spaces. And I know we've been talking about screens fading as a central portal for a long time. I guess, are you seeing when we get back to the physical environment, a lot of things you're describing, sound design and haptics and other elements, they seem to be more about engaging all the senses. How do you see us getting away from screens is maybe what I'm asking.
They're hard to get away from, I'd say.
I don't think we're getting away.
Yeah, they're hard to get away from. What I would say is we're going to, you know, that we're going to integrate them into our environments in ways where they're not necessarily like a thing you're seated on your butt staring at, but that they're there where you need them. A projection that comes on as needed, or are built into the walls in a way that supports an experience. The visual element is so powerful, but so is the audio, as you said, and having a complete sound experience that glues together the whole space with some certain visual touch points. I think that getting away from a singular screen for one person is interesting, getting away from smaller screens for 2 to 3 people, but creating environments that are immersive or for groups of people, that's an interesting direction for things to go. For the screen no longer to be a rectangle, you know, framed hanging on the wall, but, you know, whatever shape it needs to be as part of the architecture, that's for sure. But I do think that, you know, the visual wins and is such a powerful part of the storytelling. I don't see us moving away from it.
Too many nerves wired to that piece of meat, you know.
Yeah, the visual cortex. Yeah.
But you know, I think so many, like, I'm excited now because so many like use cases that were hypothesized about over the past 10, 15 years that are about merging the digital and physical worlds. And I mentioned the Bill Verplank one earlier, like just this little haptic touch, are suddenly becoming plausible to so many people. And in fact, as our world changes, you know, more desirable. And I'll give you an example. Like my neighbor across the street here has a Peloton bike, and she bought a Peloton bike for her sister in Kentucky. And they make dates to go and do a bike ride in Paris. Like they actually do this.
Fully embodied experience, but
yeah,
it's a fully embodied experience.
Well,
yeah.
It's fully embodied and also framed in a way that you have to make a leap of disbelief. But you know, it's given the options, they can't travel and see each other right now. they can't go to Paris. They can have this experience, and that was a pretty fun experience, and they enjoy it.
That's a great example because it actually plays with the ratio that Kirsten was talking about. Like, okay, this primacy of the visual, primacy of the visual, primacy of the visual.
Yeah.
The fact is that we're also really good at discerning information and subject from object, or information from clutter visually, in a way that sometimes it's harder for people to do with their auditory acuity. You know, so it's just like I think there's good reasons why. But what's interesting about that Peloton, or folks that are doing the same with these sort of workout mirrors and things like that, is they played with the ratio. They dialed down the primacy of the video. You've got, what is it? It's a 20-inch LCD in front of her, right?
Right.
At 1.5 feet. So she's seeing around it. There's no question, but maybe the physical embodiment of it is something that like kicks it over the edge. So it doesn't always have to be, first wrap them in pixels and then figure out the experience.
Yeah. The experience is compelling enough, and there's a desire to do it. So you're going to make that leap. Like you said earlier, it doesn't take much to trick the eye or trick the ear if you're willing.
Just a little motion. I mean, the little reptilian thing, part of our brain is really happy with just motion and flashy lights. I mean, that's why this kind of stuff works. It's not, you don't always have to go for literal either,
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that these are really fun questions to think about when we think about what we could build next. When you talk about, David, when you mentioned even just peripheral vision, if we could just, or even have the sensation that we can see the other reactions of other people that are experiencing something with us. Do you foresee which projects right now, like what are we going to build next, and how might we start building some of these things in?
Well, in terms of, I think that we were talking earlier, but say what's even likely to move forward right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing a lot of stuff where, to the degree that the AVIXA community is part of the event production world, that has obviously collapsed in an instant, right? Construction is deferred, but too much capital, too much momentum behind a lot of these projects to stop them. They're just deferred, and we're hearing now, starting to predict when construction projects and sites might come online and what kind of protocols. So, but, for a lot of us, there are also projects that are in design phases. And so we're kind of, we're looking there and saying, what are clients designing to, and what are we learning today and seeing from there's some really good studies and protocols that are coming out for how we might open. And so if you start to look at those models and you say, okay, well, how can we be useful and fully active with our clients as they go through these 4 stages of return, and then we're in some sort of stasis until 18 months out, vaccine time, right? How do we actually get projects that can't be built yet to be designed, and how do we take the opportunity today to design with this forward thinking, and it's just, just gating people and saying, well, we can only have so many people go through this lobby at a time. It's like, okay, there's some things that you can do about that. If you're a machine vision person and you're not thinking about people counting apps to plug into your Crestron to help your client sort of figure out how many people should be in a conference room or in a lobby or do that now. Those are tools that are available right now to this community. But there are bigger questions too. Gideon, some of the stuff you were talking about the other day really struck me in terms of how people might feel each other in a shared context, not tangibly, but know that if I'm at a festival and I'm watching a stream of a performer, how do I know the energy that's around me? How's that represented if I'm not in VR, if I'm on a screen or I'm on a phone?
Mm-hmm. Those things are further out there, I would say, but they're coming for sure. I'm a big believer in that there is a lot of data latent in the built environment that needs to be surfaced. And this is another interesting push on that. So I've done projects in the past where we've surfaced all of the energy usage data of an environment and started to bring that to the fore. But where I see immediately experience design, this skill set coming to bear is in surfacing health and wellness data in the built environment. And you know that there's going to be a real need for people to feel confident that they're coming into a healthy space when we start returning. And what can we do to restore people's confidence that they're in a safe and healthy space? And so, as we have more sensors in the built environment, sensing things like indoor air quality, thermal comfort, water quality, a whole range of noise, vibration, that's a whole data set that's out there that's invisible and is going just up to the facilities managers and things like that.
And the research is in. We know that it impacts wellness, right?
Yeah,
so,
it impacts wellness. It impacts even cognitive performance. There's a great study that shows how these things impact the performance in the workplace. So when I come into the new workplace, I want to see it glowing blue because the air quality is fresh. And so I know that there's a mindfulness about the health quality of the environment. And then you can weave into that the kind of integrated communications that might be instructions on cleanliness or instructions on keeping safe distance. So I think there's an immediate practical need of the skill set that we use that we can see in the near term as we are reinventing this hybrid world.
And I love the fact that it's about, and that's another sort of, I remember a project that we worked on a while ago where it was really at the time, really the sort of apex of how you could take building management system data and bring it over into something that was expressive, right?
Yeah.
And that expressed sort of how this building was breathing in and out and how energy was being managed vertically and so on. And I can imagine now at Arup, you're in this playground of actually being able to design those systems so that they are on networks, so that they are accessible, so that APIs can be hit, so that expressive parts of the equation are essentially already enabled by that platform, as opposed to fighting with the guy from Otis for 6 months because you want to know when the elevator door opens, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. You get working on those back-end systems, getting the data to the fore, but then reminding that, what we do at AV&C, at Arup, and the experience design side of things, we're really pushing on the front end of this digital experience and how it touches people. And all of that back-end data in smart buildings is just that, back end. It hasn't really come out into the front end.
You said it. It's latent.
Yeah.
It's sitting there in the environment.
And so I think that there's work to do immediately to bring that to the foreground in a variety of different, in hospitals, medical centers, that scenario, any type of workplace or university settings where people are coming back into shared space trepidatiously and getting signals ambiently or informatically or specific instructions is a good use case of what we do.
And I think more broadly, it's not just limited. Obviously, we design we design commercial real estate spaces, we design cultural environments. But if you think about the residential and consumer side of this, I think we're going to start to see, we're starting to collect a lot of information. The watches, the thermostats, the nests, the this, the that, they're all starting to be able to collect and actually aggregate and make sense of information. What we haven't seen a lot of is the output side on the residential side. I do see an opportunity also for consumer products designers to think about what is that object that's expressive, that tells you about your environment, in a latent way, in a sort of tangible tangible bits kind of way, to give another shout out. But because I think, whether it's our, and we seem to right now be in a cycle where there's an appetite for connected objects other than our, primary devices to be scattered around our environment. And the payoff trade-off of privacy is being navigated, right, with probably not enough information by consumers, but we'll get there. So I think there's an opportunity there too, because it doesn't just need to be commercial spaces that we design that are having this big capital push and they're going to be refixtured, and there's an opportunity. I think there's also an opportunity to scatter devices around in a way that isn't as sort of capital intensive, right?
Totally interesting. Yeah, I could see that. There is this whole area of research of these enchanted ambient objects that have data in them that tell you it's a good time to go surfing or whatever data you care about. And we probably should all have one of those sitting on our desk in our home office while we're going through this time, and then having those in the conference room so the remote people are in there. I love that idea of kind of
almost dedicated to little functions. Like it's some people have the little, literally it's time to drink water amulet. And you can almost think of the IoT of these little sort of, Amazon got it totally wrong and totally right with get me more detergent button.
Yeah, I think I'm actually pretty excited about everything you're saying because what you were just describing, in fact, it reflects the principles of calm technology. I love these little ambient sensors that just simply glow a certain tone so that we know something it's a good time to go surfing. Or I like those things. We don't need a lot of buzzers and bells, and we can kind of use this time also to think about. We all do wish we could stay a little more calm and maybe be notified of things without jarred out of our complete life experience by it. So I think everything you're describing to me sounds really optimistic, actually. And I know this is an extremely challenging time for everybody. And I think, but what you're describing is you're giving our audience a lot of hope that this is a chance to rethink things. So I think
absolutely. If I might add to that, I think that, I've always said that we're working to integrate the digital and physical worlds in our work, because once we have done that, there won't be any difference between the two, and it'll just be the world again. Mm-hmm. There's this incredible new capability set that digital things make possible, and so it's called as a separate thing, but we've been working to integrate them, and this has been one kick in the pants for the whole world to get to that integrated place of where the digital and physical become one more. We're watching concerts, we're riding Peloton bikes in Paris. I was like, yeah, that's fine. At some point it'll just become what we do, and it does afford you all these incredible capabilities, that we could do this today, for example. So I think that, the optimistic side is that, this we'll get through this virus, we'll be back in public spaces, but we're going to be doing a lot more of this on the other side of that. And it'll be this more integrated digital physical world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's pretty exciting to think that interacting with our environment right now is more important than ever, and that we get to design a pretty cool new way of interacting with our environment. So I think that's pretty invigorating. Well, I think you guys created a really great picture today, and I really do want to thank you for talking with me on this topic, and I'm really looking forward to continuing this conversation as we build things and keep talking about all these subjects. I guess in closing, let me ask you both to tell our audience where they might find you on the internet. Where can they find you?
David?
We're at AVC NYC on social channels, and you can find me and also on LinkedIn, AV&C, and websites av-controls.com.
And you'll find me at arup.com, ARUP.com, and on social channels at Arup Americas.
All right. Well, thank you so much again.
Thank you, Kirsten. I love, we have these conversations all the time. It's nice to continue them.
Thanks for listening to the Tide Generator Podcast, produced by AVIXA. Look for more episodes on Anchor and Spotify, and we'll see you next time.